Hi guys, so Kwasi Kwarteng, the business secretary, was interviewed on LBC to talk about the current problems, those of course being queues at petrol stations and the lack of general staff to work on farms and in factories, but also the shortage of heavy goods vehicle drivers, which represent the backbone of the economy. Shortages like this were predicted before Brexit. He of course says this has nothing to do with Brexit. So first you're going to hear from Tom Swarbrick from LBC, and then you're going to hear from the minister himself.
People were saying prior to the referendum happening and in the time after the referendum while it was trying to get sorted, that there would be issues with various jobs, with drivers. There was a report, I think, pre-Brexit that said that there would be a problem with getting nurses into the NHS, which is now being borne out on the front pages of the newspapers today. The truth is that these issues were forecast before COVID, before Brexit and then after Brexit, and it is a political decision not to allow for that migration to come from the EU to fill those vacancies.
Tell you about a political choice. We are choosing not to go back to uncontrolled immigration. Okay, I accept that. That's a political choice. We are not going back to. I don't know what the Labour Party position is. I don't know what their views are on this. But we are not, as a government, going to go back to uncontrolled immigration.
Okay, what he means by uncontrolled immigration, of course, is freedom of movement. So we're not going back to freedom of movement. Of course, he's not going to call it freedom of movement because that sounds good. Uncontrolled immigration sounds bad. So he's going to say we're going to end, of course, we've ended uncontrolled immigration. But if that's of course a lie, because there was never uncontrolled immigration. Because if you wanted to travel from Japan, from China, from Africa, from the United States to Britain, you needed a visa. You needed documentation in order to move there, to stay there, to visit. So there wasn't uncontrolled immigration. And when it came to Europe, if you wanted to fly into Heathrow, for example, from another part of the European Union while the UK was a member, you had to show your documentation when you entered, a passport or a national ID card. So there wasn't uncontrolled immigration. He's just lying here. Now, of course, this is him attempting to say that this is nothing to do with Brexit, but let's hear him say that.
And in making that decision, the government did not see these consequences coming.
Well, we've rehearsed this a million times. The acute shortages we're seeing now have nothing to do with Brexit, okay? They've nothing to do with that. That was a debate 5 years ago. It was a different context. What we're seeing now are acute shortages in some parts of the world because of this bounce back in demand after a large portion of the world was in lockdown. And we're seeing this in China. We're seeing blackout in China. We're seeing huge gas prices in the EU. We're seeing labor shortages in the US.
Okay, if you decided he said it himself, it was a political decision to end freedom of movement, or as he liked to call it, uncontrolled immigration. But if you relied upon the immigration for industry to operate, he's the business secretary. He should know this, that the UK relied on these workers. If you keep these workers out, if you stop them from coming in, then you're going to have shortages. Now, why did you decide to keep them out? Why did you decide to end this so-called uncontrolled immigration? Well, because of Brexit. So if you don't have the staff because you stopped quote-unquote uncontrolled immigration because of Brexit, then you can't turn around and say this has nothing to do with Brexit. It has everything to do with Brexit. Now, unfortunately for the minister, he made some predictions himself 2 years ago. Back in 2019, he was interviewed on Sky News about the UK leaving the European Union without a deal. Now remember, Boris Johnson got a deal, but there were some predictions made back in 2019. What would happen if Boris Johnson didn't get a deal with the European Union?
If we do leave without one, according to Operation Yellowhammer, hard border in Northern Ireland, shortages of food, fuel and medicines, that does sound pretty bad, you've got to be honest.
I think there's a lot of scaremongering around, and a lot of people are playing into Project Fear and all the rest of it. We've got to prepare for no deal.
So, back in 2019, anyone who was suggesting that if Boris Johnson left without a deal and there would be fuel shortages. There would be the army drafted in to drive lorries for oil tankers. There would be empty supermarket shelves. There would be problems getting medicine or different products. Anyone who said that was engaging in Project Fear and scaremongering. According to he was the energy minister at the time. Now he's the business secretary. That was if there was no deal. Boris Johnson, remember, got a deal, and we're seeing the same things that people predicted. Now, how do these ministers still go on TV and say this has nothing to do with Brexit? How can they stay in their position when they've been completely wrong on this very important issue? They're going to continue to say that it's nothing to do with Brexit because Brexit is like a cult at this stage. We have to protect Brexit. We have to protect Brexit at every cost. Because we can't be honest about it. Because as soon as we're honest about that Brexit is the problem here, the entire party perhaps implodes. Because Boris Johnson's 80-seat majority was built on a lie. Was built on the lie that Brexit will fix all of the UK's problems. As I said before, can't get your school has a leaky roof, get Brexit done. Can't get a place on an NHS waiting list, get Brexit done. You're paying too many taxes, get Brexit done. Whatever the problem, Boris Johnson's response was, get Brexit done. So I think it's probably difficult for him to turn around now and say to the people who he conned back in 2019, actually Brexit was a mistake. Brexit is not the panacea I promised it would be. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think about all of this. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.